watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
The Bay Area was a culinary delight for every kind of ethnic food under the sun except for bagels. There wasn't really a good bagel there. And in general, the Bay Area community has tremendous amount of potential in terms of a flowering of Yiddishkeit, but it needs development. And I've spent the last 10, 15 years at least in all kinds of different ways trying to develop Jewish community. And there's nothing more essential to developing Jewish community than our food. As was said, my name is Noah Alper, and I have to admit I've been a serial entrepreneur for 35 years. As was alluded to, I started 6 ventures, 4 of which were successful. So I felt with a 666 batting average, I had the credibility and the credentials to write my book, Business Mensch, Timeless Wisdom for Today's Entrepreneur. Business Mensch is a book to help entrepreneurs navigate the troubled economic waters we all find ourselves in today. And it's not only about the bottom line, but it's also about the soul and the connection between the two. It was 1969. I was a college senior at the University of Wisconsin. The Vietnam War was raging, and Madison was one of the epicenters of the anti-war movement. I was uncertain about my future, and I was afraid to be drafted and sent to a war I didn't believe in. These factors, combined with old personal issues, a steady diet of marijuana, sent me barreling over the edge. I was paranoid and I was delusional. My parents eventually took me home, and then, slowly, the process of healing began. I regained my balance, and after getting out of the hospital in late winter of 1970, I was finally able to hold down a job at my brother-in-law's book warehouse, shelving books and filling orders. Eventually, I took the next step and became a cashier at one of his stores in Harvard Square. I'm telling you this because I want to shatter the myths about what it takes or doesn't take to be a successful entrepreneur and business person. So one night during this time in Cambridge, I fell in love. Not the kind of typical love we would expect. It was the love of a salad bowl. Now this was what would have been in another time a Hochschüssel. Probably my grandmother had one that was identical to this. But in the early 70s, natural was in and plastics were out. So after being rubbed with vegetable oil, these bowls glowed. I was so excited about them that the next day I went in my VW bus, because you had to have a VW bus in 1971, and I went up to Vermont and I bought $1,000 worth of these bowls. I put them in the back of the VW bus. I was driving back to Cambridge. Blinding snowstorm, blizzard, went off the road, hit a guardrail, totaled the bus, and had to rent the largest Lincoln made in order to get all of these salad bowls in them, because otherwise, how was I going to get them back to Cambridge? I go to Cambridge, I spread out an Indian bedspread on the back of the car, and in an hour and a half, they all sold. So my first business, the Alper Wooden Bowl Company, was born. After that, I continued to make runs to Vermont, and I arranged a deal with my brother-in-law that I could sell them on the stoop in front of his store in Cambridge in exchange for a small amount of money that I would be donating to the charity of his choice. So that was a good deal, and I started to do that, and eventually spread out to the wholesale market and sold these bowls to giftware and cookware shops in the greater Boston area. Simultaneous to the development of this business in 1973, I co-founded a natural food store called Bread and Circus in the heart of the Brisket Belt in Brookline, Massachusetts. At that time, schmaltz was a staple item in every refrigerator in the area, but organic carrots, they weren't very widely purchased. There were only a handful of such stores across the country as Bread and Circus. And where did the name came from? Well, we had the full line of natural foods, and we had wooden toys and giftware. And so Panet Circenses for all you Latin scholars in the house. During Roman Empire times, when there was not enough food to eat, the emperors would provide wandering troubadours so the peasants would forget how hungry they were. That was the concept. And it was very different than what else was out there, which was health food stores. And that was sort of the Tiger bars and the distilled water and the vitamins. This was about a whole concept, a whole natural lifestyle concept that started slowly with stores like Bread and Circus and eventually led up to the development of stores like Whole Foods Market that we have today. In those days, that whole business was in its infancy. Eventually, after running this business for a few years, the confinement of a retail store sort of got to me. My kids accused me of having perma-spilkies, if people know what that means in this room. Sort of ants in the pants that won't quit. And so that was me. And so after 2 or 3 years of Bread and Circus, we sold the business to a gentleman, an Irish immigrant by the name of Anthony Harnett. And Anthony developed that business into a 6-store chain, which was eventually sold to Whole Foods Market in 1996. At the time, I knew that the business was going in that direction of a supermarket, but I wasn't the one to do it. So after having left that business, I devoted full-time attention to my woodenware business, and we brought in artisan-made products from 8 different countries and had over 2,000 wholesale customers across the United States. This business, kind of like the natural food business, was on the edge of a wave. And I guess if I could look back and say, what have I done right? One thing is to try to capture an emerging trend, and to use a surfing analogy, because I guess having lived in California for 25 years, I have to know something about surfing, not too much, but enough to know that you have to catch the wave right. If you're a little too ahead of the wave, you're gonna fall, and if you're not quite with the wave, you're never gonna get there. So. The gourmet business, if you will, was emerging at this time in the late 70s. Americans had traveled abroad. They had tasted cuisine from France. Julia Child had been around for a while. They wanted the proper utensils in their homes to prepare and serve their favorite dishes. So I rode that wave, and with this expansion, Alper Wooden Bowl Company's identity was not quite broad enough for what we wound up going into. So the Alper Wooden Bowl Company became Alper International, Inc. I was never accused of being shy or not self-serving, so we just kind of went out with it. In 1984, I was able to sell that business successfully to a colleague, and had enough resources to take a year off. Before I was going to be moving to the West Coast, which was part of that year of time out, I decided to go to Israel on a whim. I'd never been there. I was curious to see what it was all about. I immediately fell in love with the land, the people, and the spirit. I came back determined to try to strengthen the Israeli economy by connecting my next business with the Jewish state. Ronald Reagan was in power, and I heard a statistic that 1 in 3 Americans had admitted to a born-again Christian conversion. And so I processed this for at least 2 minutes, which is a fairly long time for me, and decided that there's got to be a way to sell gifts and food from the Holy Land to evangelical Christians here in America. special gifts from a special place, buy products from where he walked. That was the concept. Well, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was a total and abject failure. It started off at zero and ended up pretty much below zero. So I kind of wondered, what went wrong with the business, and I thought about it in retrospect and realized that instead of being the front guy with a catalog, and I had a pseudonym of Norman Charles, that was my name because I had to make my persona appealing to Southern Baptists and religious Christians of all types. I should have sort of been a back room kind of guy and supplied somebody like a Pat Boone, who would have been a much more logical candidate to sell these products and been an expediter. But as I say in my chapter, Come Back Stronger, I firmly believe I would not have been as successful in my next enterprise, which was Noah's Bagels, had I not experienced this abject failure. And I'll give you an example. My landlady at our first bagel store told me, after we had been in business for a couple of years and were doing very well, that she was not going to rent the store to me. It was in a very good location in Berkeley, a mile from the UC campus. But she said the drive that you exhibited made me realize that there was no way that you were going to fail at that business. You were just on fire. So anyway, backing up a little bit, losing the Holy Land Gifts Company, I had to face a sobering situation, which is that I needed a job or a business concept, and I needed it fast because I had a family to support. Just at that time, my brother Dan came back from Montreal with a video that he had taken of a bagel shop up in Montreal that was kind of like the Willy Wonka of bagel shops. Glass walls, you could see the dough going around the conveyor belts. He was very, very excited about this and told me that I should do it in Berkeley. So at which point I turned to him and said, so if this is such a great idea, why don't you do it? He was also looking for something to do. No, you're the entrepreneur. So as the younger brother, I did what I was told, at least to the point of exploring it. My entrepreneurial curiosity led me to explore the possibility of doing bagels in Berkeley. During the Alper International days, the housewares days, I had attended the first ever gourmet show, which was held in San Francisco. And I knew that San Francisco had every manner of great ethnic food, with one major exception. There wasn't a half-decent bagel to be found. So after my year of research, which included, by the way, prowling around the bowels of old New York, from the back streets of Brooklyn to the lowest of the Lower East Side, I explored every nook and cranny and tasted every bagel in the city. I had spent 3.5 years at NYU before transferring to the University of Wisconsin. So I sort of had a sensory knowledge of what this quintessentially New York product should look like and feel like. But I would always check with my wife, Hope, a Brooklyn native, to make sure my concept stayed on track and was authentic. So finally, after this year, I decided it was a go, no-go situation. I decided I had a terrific recipe, I had a winning concept, and I would combine this great bagel with an appetizing store, which as New Yorkers you're all familiar with, but certainly in Berkeley, nobody was familiar with an appetizing store except for the transplants. So we got all manner of smoked fish. We had babka. We had old-fashioned barrel pickles. It was a great fusion of a bagel store and an appetizing store. And as I said earlier, from day one at the first store, 1 mile from the UC campus, it was a tremendous success, something that I never would have imagined going in the direction it went as fast as it went. I never intended to found a large company. It was like one great bagel store, make a living. But you know what? I was in the right business at the right time with the right people, and it went. And furthermore, bagels at that point were just starting to hit the mainstream. As you may remember there was such a thing called carbo loading back in the late 80s. Now it's like, what's that, with Atkins and everything. But the idea was the more carbs you ate, the stronger athlete you would be. Well, what they didn't really say, it was just kind of in the small print, was that was fine if you were a marathoner. If you were just a sort of a normal person, you'd get fat. And as I'm fond of saying, it took about 6.5 years for the population to realize that. And the bagel business that was going up like this, just really literally in the same year that we sold the business, started to level out when carbs became a no-no. But we rode that wave very nicely for 6.5 years. So getting back to the origins of the business, 1 year after I opened the first store, the same brother Dan came knocking at the door. That's very hard to imagine, wanting to get involved. I wasn't sure how to do this. Am I the boss? Is he the boss? I learned way back when you don't hire anyone you can't fire, and it's hard to fire your brother. But on the insistence of my mother, and she was very insistent, you need to bring Danny into the business. I figured out a way. He was going to be a licensee. I was going to be the licensor. I was going to run the marketing. He would do the retail expansion. We had our territories carved out quite nicely. And he also brought a lot to the table. He was a Stanford Business School grad. He was an expert in administration and finance. He was tremendous at identifying quality real estate sites and negotiating them, the leases, and all this kind of stuff that I didn't have a clue about. So it was really a good winning shidduch or marriage, and we took this business to the moon, really literally. So I've discussed a few of the tactics necessary for a winning business. There's lots more in the book, but I wanted to just emphasize that I think that what we did really well, the three things that we did well that kind of tied the business together, was our approach to customers, where we literally treated our customers like kings and queens. I remember one guy who came into the store and said, when I was the manager, he said, you have antenna on your head, and they're like beamed at the customers, and if there's anything wrong, you're just right at it. Even before there's a problem, you've identified it and fixed it. And that really was how we conducted ourselves, very, very customer-focused. Our employees, who we empowered and celebrated. What I say in the book was that in a era where teenagers are demonized, we celebrated them, and I think that was really true. And thirdly, our communities. From the very beginning, we had all kinds of community service programs, everything from bring a book for the library, you get a free bagel, bring a voting stub, we'll give you a free bagel. We hired disabled people. We had send a kid to camp programs. We had our day-old product all arranged to be delivered to food banks. Everything we could do to make ourselves of value to the community and accepted by the community and loved by the community, we did. As an example, our grand openings. Even before we opened the store, we hired the crew for a day. We identified with local leaders what the most important community service projects in their neighborhood were. We took this crew of 30 people. That's a formidable amount of people to work on a community service project for a day. So in a day, I remember in a rough part of Venice, California, we had a woman's house painted in an entire day of community service work. So that would come first. And then at the store, we would have our grand opening ceremony where we would hang a mezuzah, we'd dance the hora, we'd drink kosher champagne, and it was just a wonderful celebration that we would include rabbis and local community leaders and, of course, all of our crew. And after having done these service projects, it just was a wonderful, wonderful celebration. So in 1995, we were expanding very, very fast, and we were looking for a strategic partner. we had been co-locating with Starbucks, meaning we'd find ourselves on a corner, and you know what, who's renting next door? Starbucks. It just turned out that the best locations we were looking at, and as were they. And we found that every location where they were and we helped one another. So it was a very symbiotic relationship. And we decided to formalize this relationship by bringing in Starbucks as a 25% owner of Noah's. So this happened in 1995. And then a serious threat. The Einstein Bagel Company out of Golden, Colorado, a public company, was acquiring regional bagel companies across the country. And they came to us and they said, you basically have two choices. One is sell us your business. The second is look for one of our stores across from every one of your stores. So that was an interesting challenge. We talked amongst ourselves and we said, you know what, we could probably take them on. We had a better concept. We were, as I mentioned, we had those extra things going for us. We were very well loved in our communities. But after about a year of negotiation, and an excellent price, we got an offer we couldn't refuse. And we sold the business in 1996, thus averting a bloody bagel shootout in the Wild West. When you read my book, you will learn that I'm a firm believer in working hard, but at the same time, I believe in the vital importance of taking quality time away to main perspective and to ensure that family and health thrive. After all, what's really important? How many Lincoln Continentals you can drive, or the health, mental health and physical health of the family. I am sort of stunned and amazed at the technological revolution that I find myself in today. I believe this 24/7, or if you keep Shabbat, the 24/6 lifestyle really is not sustainable from a mental or a physical health standpoint. And this technological revolution of ours comes at a very, very high price. And I'm a firm believer that a life of balance is, while increasingly hard to maintain, has never been more important to strive for. And I spend a whole chapter discussing this. In my case, my big Shabbat experience came after the Noah's Bagels was sold. I had a dream of spending a year in Jerusalem and learning all the, or what I could in a year, of Jewish thought that I had never learned as a child. At the end of the year, I came back feeling like I was looking through a window that I had just cleaned off, and there was the knowledge. I've got about that far in a year, but that was an absolutely tremendous experience, not only for myself, but my family. My two kids were in public school in Jerusalem. My wife did a lot of volunteer work, and at the end of this fabulous year, I came back, and literally, when the plane landed at San Francisco Airport, I was approached to help start a Jewish community high school in San Francisco. I talked with a woman whose idea it was, and I said, if we're going to talk about it, I don't think so. If we're going to do it, I'm very interested. I had a son who was then in 6th grade. We had 3 years to get this school from the idea phase to up and running, which we were able to do. It's now in its 9th year. We have 175 students. It's going strong. And I'm very proud of my oldest son, who established a kosher organic lunch program that still exists and I think is a model for kosher and organic and healthful eating across the nation. After establishing the school and spending 4 years of full-time volunteer work on it, I again had the itch to get into the food business. If any of you are in the food business, you know what that's like. It's sort of like you can't totally get away from it. It comes and kind of gnaws at you until you're back in. So my wife and I opened a kosher Italian vegetarian restaurant in downtown Berkeley in the fall of 2003. And like the other things I've done with the high school and the bagels, we not only had delicious food, but we wanted it to be a community gathering place for Jews of all stripes. So we ran Ristorante Raphael for 4 years, and in 2007, the business was sold. The bottom line results weren't there, but we had many adoring patrons and tons of great memories. In the beginning of 2008, in response to many requests, I started my own business consulting practice to help small businesses with concept creation, marketing, and executive planning. And later on that year, I began thinking about creating a business memoir to chronicle the lessons I had learned, both personal lessons and business lessons, and thus my book, Business Mensch, Timeless Wisdom for Today's Entrepreneur. So while envisioning this book, Jewish thought informed my direction. The timeless wisdom of our sages, some of which I had the privilege to explore in Jerusalem, is a powerful body of knowledge. It's powerful and it's universal. I was motivated to frame the book through the lens of Jewish values and Jewish pride. In the book, I talk about being a mensch along with being highly successful in business, dispelling the notion that most or all Jewish business people are like Bernard Madoff, the anti-mensch. In the book, I share wisdom that in my case was not learned in business school or on MBA computer models, but from eternal sources and through my own trial and error on what I like to say are the real streets of life. So with your permission, I'm going to read just a couple more pieces in the book, and then I'm going to take some questions. So this is from the chapter called The Power of a Mensch. And I go on to explain how a mensch is not a pushover. But in this case, I want to read a little piece that begins with a story about my father, Oliver Sholem. And he was a tremendous influence and inspiration to me. And this is a passage that references a project that he worked on in the 50s. In the 1950s, long before the government enacted laws to protect employees and prohibit workplace discrimination, my father, David Alper, a food broker in New England, founded the Massachusetts Commission on Fair Employment Practices. Its name made it sound like a bona fide government agency, but it wasn't. Dad and one friend took it upon themselves to speak out for workers. They would investigate reports of discrimination and write press releases to bring attention to the issue. They were bloggers before their time. Dad always taught me that people are capable of tremendous things. An employer's role is to give them a chance, supply them with the tools they need, and help them reach their potential. I saw the benefits of treating your employees right firsthand and developed what I call the 14-piece bucket rule. The term came from the college summer I spent traveling around the country working odd jobs. In Denver, where I worked as a delivery boy for a chicken place, the owner had a policy of not giving the employees any free food. I spent long hours inhaling the aroma of freshly fried chicken. My mouth was watering. I'm only human. But I knew the policy. It just felt unfair to me. It felt cruel and inhumane to put a 20-year-old kid around food all day and tell him he can't eat. So after a while, let's say the 16-piece chicken buckets started becoming 14-piece chicken buckets. Later, when I ran Noah's, I made sure that our policy allowed our employees to eat as much food as they wanted. To me, that simply made good sense and good business sense. Instead of tempting my employees into sneaking a bit, I invited them to feel a part of the enterprise. At Noah's, I had happy employees who met customers with a smile and a recommendation about how delicious the onion bagels were that day. And by the way, that resulted in us having half the turnover rate of the average quick-serve restaurant in the industry. So folks, at the heart of my message in Business Mensch is doing the right thing not only makes us feel good, but it's good for business. And I want to say also that like the old Levy's rye bread ad, you don't have to be Jewish to love Business Mensch, timeless wisdom for today's entrepreneur. Thank you. This was Jewish bakers in Poland who had sort of effectively imitated a local bread product and had sort of customized it, and then brought it to the Lower East Side of New York and recreated it. I would suggest going under any elevated subway train in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn bagels are the best. I'm sorry. I've tried every bagel in Manhattan. I'm sorry. I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers today, folks. I've tried every bagel, I think, in Manhattan, and they don't compare to the bagels in Brooklyn. They're just, I don't know what it is. You don't have to be too picky. You just have to, if you live there, you're fine. Otherwise, schlep to Brooklyn, and you'll find good ones without even really looking too hard for them.
The best bagel is in Park Slope at the Bagel Hall on 12th and 13th Street.
Well, there you go.
Sorry, I disagree.
On the other hand,
When I brought up the bagels, you didn't like bagels?
see, this is the Beit Midrash, and the Beit Midrash is a place where we have dialogue, argumentation. It's apropos. By the way, we're not going to settle this today. We had occasion at one point to have, if you will, seed salesmen, okay, come by and sample. I'm like, looking at the guy, what's a poppy seed's a poppy seed's a poppy seed? Well, you put them side by side in a Petri dish and put a blindfold on and tried them and said, you know what, that one is superb and that one's so-so. I mean, it was really very much of an awakening. Quality ingredients, number one. Number two, obsessive attention to detail. I was taught about shop conditions, that every bakery has different atmospheric conditions. It's high ceilings, it's low ceilings, it's the temperature of the oven, it's lots and lots of different micro, mini factors. It's about obsessiveness, okay? And lastly, I had occasion to have a long conversation with Murray Lender. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Lender's frozen bagels, but at the time that he developed that product in the 50s and 60s, it was really pretty amazing to have a Jewish product like bagels go into Peoria, Illinois, because this guy came up with a concept to the gentleman who mentioned it in the back, of selling a frozen bagel across the country. So Murray knew his bagels, and when I was going into the bagel business, I said, Murray, so what makes a great bagel? You know, I heard it was the water in New York. Is that true? He says, the water in New York's a Bubbermeister. He says, what makes a great bagel? Competition. That's what makes a great bagel. Shmuley has this. You want to do as well as him, you're going to do that. And then he's going to do that. And pretty soon it all rises. And I came away firmly agreeing that Murray Lender's treatise on what makes a great bagel is really the bottom line. We try to make our store overtly Jewish and unapologetically Jewish, as the Israeli consulate said to us one time. Brochures for all the various holidays, Hamantaschen and Purim, a kosher food program. We closed on Passover. So we even went as far as to having Hanukkah parties and not Christmas parties, and eliminating Christian symbols in all of our public spaces in our corporate offices, because this was a Jewish business and it should be run like that, all-inclusive.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.